Now it's time for us to bridge the divide. And I'm going to try to bridge the divide between the Seahawks, Pete Carroll, John Schneider, and Russell Wilson. I'm going to allow Russell Wilson to be frustrated with the offensive line, even though he went about it in not the best way possible. But I am not going to allow Russell Wilson to have no faith in the Seahawks attempting to improve the roster. Whether it's the offensive line, the pieces around the offensive line, the defense, because it's factually inaccurate. And if you take a look at the things that the Seahawks have done over the last couple of years, how many teams have been more aggressive at trying to improve themselves than Seattle? Starts off, you trade Frank Clark away, you get a couple of draft picks because of that. But then afterwards, the Seahawks trade for Jadeveon Clowney. The Seahawks traded for Quandre Diggs. They traded for Jamal Adams. They traded for Carlos Dunlap. In our show prep, DJ highlights that they traded for Sheldon Richardson. DJ highlighted that also they traded for Jimmy Graham. They have gone after guys. Has it always worked out? No. Dwayne Brown, another player that the Seahawks traded for. By the way, he's on the offensive line. I think that Russ, if he's patient, he might actually get what he wants. And I understand that maybe he has privately been talking about his frustration with the offensive line and the lack of improvement along the way. And maybe he feels at this point that he just has not been heard. But why would you have so little faith in the organization's attempts to continue to improve? I mean, this is a team that has been proactive on that front, and much more so than other teams. Maybe not in free agency, but would you rather be like the Miami Dolphins or Washington football team or the New York Jets or some of the other idiot teams that go out and spend big in free agency? I mean, the Dolphins are finally figuring out that, you know what, if we have a bunch of draft picks and build that way, that actually works out, as opposed to giving some mediocre player a huge contract and trying to play catch-up with the Patriots, the same way that the Jets were doing for all that time. That ain't how it works. What you should do is, I think, be aggressive with how you draft. And one of the things that the Seahawks have done has been aggressive with trades, trading for veteran players, trading for real assets that can help the Seahawks out in the short term, which is great. Guess what else the Seahawks have been able to do in addition to that? In addition to that short-term side of things, they've also found a way to turn players into draft picks. And I think that's the most interesting thing to watch for over the coming weeks leading up to the NFL draft. Are the Seahawks going to say, you know what, we only got 4 draft picks right now. The last time we only had 4 draft picks, we had to find a way to get more. Frank Clark was not someone that we were going to give $100 million the same way that DeMarcus Lawrence got $100 million from the Dallas Cowboys. So we're going to trade him. Some other team's going to do that. We're going to get draft picks back, and we're going to turn that into a bunch of players. And boy, they turned that into a bunch of players, whether it was the first-round pick that they already had, which I believe they turned into 4 players, or it's just the Frank Clark trade, which allowed them to get L.J. Collier. We'll see how that goes. Damian Lewis. They improved by getting more guys, even though Frank Clark has been a huge difference maker in the playoffs. So how do you make Russell Wilson perhaps drop the sword that he currently has and is darting it through the sports talk medium by poking and poking and poking some things that he would like to see better on the offensive line? Well, we're going to play a game the rest of this offseason. It's a game that involves us trying to find ways to make Russ happy, and it's very creatively named.
Make Russ happy.
Got a little music in the background. Wheel of Fortune from 1994 to 1997. Yeah? I feel like Frank Sinatra right now, rolling through Las Vegas. Gonna bet on some big ticket acquisitions that I could potentially get for Russell Wilson. Last week, I floated the idea, you know what, bring in T.Y. Hilton. Maybe he'll just get distracted like a cat with the toy and move on. Tongue-in-cheek, I said that. Another option, apparently, for the Seattle Seahawks is a tight end by the name of Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz has played for the Philadelphia Eagles since 2013, and he's a guy that just a couple of years ago, 2018, had 116 receptions as a tight end. This is Travis Kelce territory for 1,163 yards and 8 touchdowns. That was a season where Carson Wentz, for the most part, was healthy the whole way through. There haven't been many of those. He and Carson Wentz, though, had a really good rapport with one another. Supposedly, per an Eagles beat writer for Sports Illustrated, the Seahawks and the Eagles have talked about Zach Ertz as a tight end. Now, there are some certain things that you need to know about Zach Ertz. He has got a contract that is not the easiest to bring aboard. He is somebody that if you're going to make a trade for him, you shouldn't have to give up much more than what you gave up for Carlos Dunlap, which, by the way, wasn't much. 7th-round pick and B.J. Finney. I would imagine that Zach Ertz is probably reasonably a 4th or a 5th-round pick as far as you send that over to Philly and they'll give you that back. Because I think they're also trying to free up cap space and just move things in a different direction. And Ertz seems more part of the Carson Wentz regime. Another guy that the Eagles are trying to move. I am not advocating for this trade. I just want to make it clear. But I'm asking the question, if the Seahawks were to go about making this trade, do you think Russ would be happier? Because I am of the belief that if you give Russ more weapons, Russ will be happier. I understand, yes, you want to build up the offensive line, but I think that Russ would see somebody like Zach Ertz on paper and see a guy who has been extremely productive and believe that something could be made to work with him. Now with Shane Waldron aboard as your offensive coordinator, a guy who has tight end coaching experience, theoretically, Zach Ertz and Russell Wilson could actually be the tight end quarterback tandem that we have never seen here in Seattle, despite best efforts with guys like Jimmy Graham or Greg Olsen. It's worked with Will Dissly. But when you decide to make a trade like this, you only have a limited amount of resources. And I am really curious to see if the Seahawks say to themselves right now, this offseason, we're going to do what we've been doing over the last couple of years. We're going to trade a draft pick to go and get ourselves better in the short term. And yeah, maybe at the expense of the long term, but what would you rather have? Would you rather use a 5th-round pick, a 4th-round pick on a player who might turn into someone great, but far more likely is going to be, at best, someone who's on your team 3 to 4 years? Maybe he contributes. Maybe he's nothing more than a special teamer. Or would you rather have 1 to 2 years of an actual asset? This sort of brings us back to the Jadeveon Clowney trade. You traded a 3rd-round pick for Jadeveon Clowney for a 1-year rental. And Clowney was your best defensive player that season, even though he didn't put up the production statistically that you would have liked to see. Clowney was a one-man wrecking crew. They made the best decision, even though I was advocating otherwise. Hey, sign this guy. Look at him. He's great. Partly because I'd covered the guy in Houston, and I just am a big fan of him as it is. But they made the right decision moving on from him. That 3rd-round draft pick that they traded for him, were they going to get something better that was going to help them out more in 2019 than that? I don't think so. So I do think that the Seahawks should at the very least explore the idea of using the very few draft picks that they have to go and get something that can actually help you this year. Because who knows if the draft's going to be able to help you. This is a weird year. The combines are all taking place in a bunch of different spots. It's going to be difficult to really accurately gauge one player versus another to compare them, because every single one of these places is going to be doing things by their own standards. There's always going to be slight differences between them. So this might be one of those years, more even so than last year, where you say to yourself, you know what? Let's get the veterans. Let's go all in for this coming season. So that's my